So hello to everyone watching this, wherever and whenever you're getting your feed. I'm Martin Cross, this is Cross's Corner, and with me is Steven Dowd, Chairman of the PRF Foundation, keynote speaker, and generally amazing guy. And we've got a lot to talk about, Steven.
We do. Hi, Crossy. How you doing?
Hey, so it's really good to be with you. Let's just get a start by getting a sense of, how your days are, the sort of things that you spend your time doing.
Yeah, day in the life of. So, well, let's take today. I'm a bit windswept at the moment because my wife and I have just got back from the beach taking the cockapoos for a walk. They're like, if you don't know, cockatoos are a bit like dogs, only less like dogs, right? So more like cushions than dogs. But yeah, no, we were down on the beach earlier today, running them, making sure that they're sort of living a decent life. So it's all good.
Fantastic. Now, we've been in contact and talking about what's happening in Aviz shortly, which is this training camp that the whole world knows, this wonderful centre in Portugal where the British team I know spends a lot of time, but a lot of other international teams spend time there. So, and you're involved with a camp in Aviz shortly.
Yeah, exactly. So through my role at PRF Foundation, as you mentioned, I'm the chair of the board of directors there. We have a small board. And we put together a number of different supporting structures effectively for para rowers around the world. We're going to be going to Aviz. I'm literally flying out tomorrow. The athletes will be there on the 15th. And we're going to run a training camp in a national training model, like a national team model. As you rightly say, this is an incredible place to be. If you're into rowing, this is a paradise for rowers. 31 kilometers of flat water, incredible environment. We're going to have 8 athletes, international athletes from 8 different countries. We've got 5 elite and Paralympic coaches from 4 different countries that will be joining us too, along with a few of the PRF staff. So yeah, we're going to have 14 flags represented, and it's going to be an amazing event. Really looking forward to it.
I can hear from the tone of your voice that you're very excited about it. I'm just thinking, who sorts out your boats for you?
So actually, we borrow some of the boats or rent some of the boats when we're there. You may well know Luis Teixeira, who runs Haddad to Cortesia, forgive my pronunciation, which is the amazing hotel that's right on the training centre. So we either borrow or rent boats from them. Although this year we have a new partner in Nello that you may well know as well.
I know Nello.
Yeah, so Nello Rowing is a guy called Nuno Mendes who literally arrived at Aviz today.
I know Nuno.
With some boats for us to try. So we're going to
para boats.
No, actually. So these are going to be fine singles and doubles.
Yeah.
One of the things that you'll know from your own work, right? That para rowing, international para rowing at the competitive level has to be in a specific boat. It has to be in a para boat, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, that doesn't mean to say that because you carry an injury or you have an impairment of some kind that you have to only row in those boats. And we've put people with impairments in singles and in doubles, and they've absolutely flown. So yeah, we're going to be getting them into the boats from Nello as well to give them a new experience on the water so they can test their bodies in a new way. They can really find what it feels like to be on the water in faster boats.
That's really interesting because I've never talked to a para athlete and said, because I guess I'm so used to seeing them in para boats, I've never kind of said, although I suppose PR3 athletes, they row in like an Empaka Shell, which is a fine boat, and they row in Empaka pairs in the non-Paralympic PR2. But I've never talked to other para athletes like PR2 athletes or PR1 athletes. I guess PR1 wouldn't be in a fine shell, but I guess maybe some PR2 athletes could.
Yeah, absolutely. We've from the camp that we did last year, we did this very same camp last year with less athletes. We had 5 athletes last year. We had a Canadian double that was organised. It was a Nello, actually, purely by coincidence. And we had the Paralympic Jesse Brock. Paralympian Jesse Brock was rowing alongside the Invictus Games medalist Patrick Levy. And we had them both in a Nello shell. They're both PR2. They're both fixed seat. In fact, we used the opportunity to take one of the prototype seats that PRF Foundation are designing ourselves, which is a carbon and fiberglass monocoque seat pan. and we strapped both of those into the PR2 boat. So yeah, that was an incredible opportunity to watch PR2 rowers in a fine boat.
I love that. I'm going to ask more of the PR2 rowers about whether they get themselves into fine boats. That's
Just because
great.
it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done, right? The only reason
No.
they don't do it is because of the rules.
Yeah, that's a great shout. So you mentioned these different athletes and coaches. I'm intrigued to know where they're from nationally, who they might be, and yeah, just a tiny bit of background to these guys that are going to be on the Aviz camp.
No, absolutely. So many of them I don't even know myself yet. We've got 2 returning athletes that were there from last year. But if I go kind of top to bottom shopping list style, I won't tell you about the individual impairments that they have. That's their story to tell, obviously.
Yeah.
So we'll leave that to them. But names and countries and classifications in the PR1 category, we've got 4 this year. So we've got Asiya Mohammed Sururu, who's the Kenyan athlete.
Yeah, she's from Nairobi, isn't she?
She's from Mombasa, actually.
Oh, I've got lives in Nairobi for my little bio of her. But yeah,
so to be honest, she's a bit of a social butterfly. Spends a lot of time in a lot of countries. So she's a PR1 athlete. She performed at the Tokyo Games and will also now be going to Paris. You'll see her in Paris. She also is a wheelchair tennis person as well. So that's probably where you may well see her too.
Yeah.
Multi-sport, incredible woman. We also then in the PR1 category have a woman from Egypt called Zara Mohammed. So she'll be joining us too, making sure that visas allow that to happen. That's become more challenging for her. Then we have, who else is in PR1? We have Ava Mol from the Netherlands.
Oh, yeah, Ava Mol. Yeah, now I saw a race in, I think it was Varese last year. She's a new to run. I think she only started it in 22, didn't she?
She is relatively new. She's incredible, actually, to watch. She's also a paraclimber. That's where she's medalled previously. So
you're kidding?
Yeah, so she's got another multi-sport person.
Yeah.
But she's amazing and she's a bundle of energy. If you check out our photos after the event, you will see Ava's smile everywhere. She's got an incredible smile.
Yeah.
And then who else sits in PR1? We also have. I'll come back to that. Then we've got PR2. We've got a guy from Latvia, a guy called Krists.
Yeah.
I'm going to screw up his surname here, but it's Mikevics, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Mikevic, yeah. That's plausible.
Sounds about right. Yeah. So he's the PR2 Latvian. So looking forward to meeting Chris. I've not met him before. Another guy who's full of beans. So yeah, looking forward to seeing him. And then in the PR3 category, we have 3 rowers. So we have Rebecca Knight, who is a Welsh rower. So she's an up-and-coming by potential.
Yeah.
We have from Ireland, John Kenny, who was previously PR2 and has recently been reclassified PR3.
Okay.
So he'll be rowing as PR3 with us, but he obviously is at that crossover stage. And then we have a Brazilian called Gil Gigante. I can't pronounce his full surname, but Gil Gigante is how he's known. So that's what we'll call him. And so he's a PR3 rower there as well. So that's all of those. And then who's my extra PR1? You know, I can't do this service. I'm going to have to look this up to make sure.
Yeah. I just while you're doing that, I was just thinking Brazil have such a great heritage in para rowing. I guess from having the Paralympics there, but you know they generally you'd see a couple of Brazilian crews in the para championships going head to head, racing each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've got some great history there, and I'm looking forward to seeing again the energy that you get from the Brazilians is huge. So that's really going to play into the camp. And then the final PR1 rower that I mentioned is Alana Flax Clark from the US.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So Alana is also a para-equestrian and competitor. So that's another multi-sport woman that's going to be on the water with us.
Yeah. So we'll continue talking about that, but we do get some questions, as you might know, in Crossy's Corner. And James Felt, hi James, it's lovely to see that you're tuned into this. You mentioned the seats earlier, Steve, and Yeah, there's a few technology questions. So maybe you can explain why seats are so important and how come you're getting development seats out there.
Absolutely.
And outriggers on fine shells. I guess that's the PR1 sort of stabilizers that James is talking about there.
Yeah, absolutely. We refer to them as pontoons or floats.
Yeah,
So yeah, and hi James, by the way, long time no see. Yeah, so they do fit. We're making them fit effectively. So it's not that with a small piece of small bit of tampering, you can't get stuff to work. We're taking a boatman from the UK out with us as well. So he's one of the other represented flags, a guy called Andy Kelly, and he rows at Broxbourne. He's a boatman at Broxbourne. And yeah, so we effectively are going to be making the floats fit the boats to the needs of the athlete. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is that we, rather than be boat centric and try and fit our athletes around the boats, we're going the other way around. Yeah, what does our athlete need to make sure that their body performs at the best that it can perform? It's all about meeting their potential ultimately.
yeah. And talk to us about the seats now and why they are so crucial in para rowing.
Absolutely. So fixed seats is what we're talking about, really. That's the PR1 and PR2 categories. The fixed seats, as they stand, there are fixed seats available. You can go and get a Swift seat or various seats that are around. Yeah, others are available too. But we found that at the elite end, the high performance and elite end, then they could have been improved, and there were opportunities to do things that were more streamlined, that could transfer the power better, that could keep the athlete in the seat in the right position for them as they pull on the oar to avoid injury and also make the boat go faster. So we decided to get some design together and have taken it literally to the drawing board to redesign what these seats should and could look like.
When you say we, like who's we?
Para Rowing Foundation. So
Okay.
So one of the key things about Para Rowing Foundation is we do what the athlete. We're very athlete centered. So everything that we do is for the athlete to perform at their best potential.
Yeah.
And in this case, at this end of the market, not to say that we don't work with people at the entry part of the market as well, because we absolutely do. But when you're at the high potential and the Paralympic levels or the high performance levels, then you don't always necessarily have the thing that you need without spending thousands upon thousands of dollars for a custom seat. So we're building a sort of halfway house where we can get a monocoque shell that will fit most people, that can then be adapted to them.
I get the picture. Before we talk about some of the coaches there, it's really interesting. Obviously, all this comes at a cost, and obviously working in the Para Rowing Foundation, you raise money for stuff like this. How does that work?
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, frankly, the more money we can raise, the more we can do. We're very lucky that our board, which is primarily 4 people, all of them are volunteers. So everybody that works at the Para Rowing Foundation, nobody's paid a penny to do this. This is everything we do on our own time, effectively. So pure love and passion is what drives Para Rowing Foundation at that level. But you're totally right. These things don't come cheaply. Running a camp for a whole week, bringing in people from international countries together so that they can get what they need, both the coaches and the athletes, they're not paying for any of this. We're covering all of their accommodation and their costs and everything. Then we rely on our donors and our partners to do that. Nello, for instance, that are loaning the boats, they're doing that for free. They're going to get some airtime, and obviously I'm talking about it right now.
So
and same with Haddad to Kotija, we will be covering their bills through our coffers, but that all mostly comes from very generous donors. So if you are one, thank you. Please continue to be. If you're not yet one but would like to be, give us a call. We'd love to speak to you. And also from grants that we can find around the world that are aimed at assisting people with impairments, whether they be specifically rowing or through spinal cord injury grants or whatever it might be.
So, what does it cost to run the Para Rowing Foundation for a year, and how much more would you like to be able to raise?
It's a good question. The honest answer is it does depend. I mean, that's such a woolly answer, but I mean, to run the sort of events that we run, they don't come cheaply. An event like this could easily cost us 50 grand. So if we're in that ballpark, then we can run one of these. We have enough interest and enough rowers and enough coaches that want to be involved to run this camp every 2 months. We could do this regularly. But as it stands, it is an annual event primarily. We'd like it to be more. It may well be more, and depends on the amount of money that we can raise as to how often we can offer this.
Yeah. So, being specific, how can people contact the Power Own Foundation to donate if they're so interested?
Well, the easiest thing in the world to do is go to powerownfoundation.org and drop us a note. You can either drop us an email and talk about how you'd like to be involved, or you can, if you just wanted to make a simple donation, there's an opportunity to do that on the website. You can hit the donate button and drop off whatever generous donation you wish to make. Everything from $10 to $1,000. Everything is welcome, and all of it will go directly to the athletes.
So, how are you funding the coaches?
Again, PRF, from our fundraising coffers, we fund the coaches on a stipend basis. They're not on the payroll for us. So the coaches that are coming to this camp are selected differently in the same way the athletes are every year. They make an application. We go through who would be good for the athletes that we have. And we do make a stipend contribution to their costs, but it's not a job in that way. So again, it's love and generosity of their time that brings them to the camp.
Yeah. And you mentioned a Welsh Paralympic athlete, or a potential Paralympic athlete, PR3 rower, and I just kind of thought then, where does anything that you do sit with what the British para squad are doing? Like, what contact might there be, or liaison to any extent?
So Power Own Foundation are athlete led, which means that we work primarily for the athlete. And if that means we then have to, so we're not attached to a boat club, we're not attached to a governing body, we're wholly independent. But what that does mean is that we have a lot of work to do in terms of understanding where that athlete sits, in what structure they sit, what support they currently have. And so that will bring us into touch with governing bodies and clubs and things like that as well. So, for instance, Welsh Rowing, we have a connection to Welsh Rowing. We'll talk to Welsh Rowing about who they are, what they do, what they need, how we can sit alongside them so we can work in synergy to them. We're not going to be replacing what they do. We can't. But we are in a position to be able to assist the athlete if the athlete has needs above and beyond what the national governing body might be providing.
And it's quite interesting, isn't it? You talked about, some of the athletes going on the Aviz camp being already selected to represent their country in Paris in 2024, the games. Is that something I kind of, this sounds a bit of a stupid question. Is that something you're going to be looking at going to?
Well, luckily, I live in the UK and Paris is only a hop away, right? So I'm quite looking forward to getting over to Paris to cheer them on. I kind of don't care which country they come from, frankly, because para rowing is the winner if we are on the water and we're competing with one another. But we will have athletes that we have direct connection with. I'm very honoured to be brought into line with a number of athletes that have either Paralympic qualification in their pocket already or hopefully soon to be. So yeah, certainly I will be in Paris checking them out and cheering from the sidelines. You'll probably hear me.
That's really good to know. I mean, Stephen, you're talking about para rowing here with great authority. But I guess it's relatively new to you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, para rowing. I would call myself an athlete, a para athlete. I do row. But I'm nowhere near an accomplished rower. And
where do you row?
Well, if I do row, I go down to Guildford because the guys down at Guildford, they're an amazing group of people, and actually they have more para rowers than most clubs. It's quite unusual to have so many para rowers in one place, and they happen to be 45 minutes away from here. So it's lucky me, really. But yeah, most clubs, I'm mindful, might have one or maybe no para rowers, so it becomes a barrier to entry for a lot of people. But luckily for me, I found a club nearby, and yeah, the support that I get from those guys when I get out on the water is wonderful.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned at the start about you being a keynote speaker, and one of the things you speak about is your story, which is very striking, and I guess it would also fit for just letting people know how you come to have been so closely involved with para rowing?
Yeah, sure. So my story kind of, to answer that question, there's almost two legs of it, really. So initially, I used to work for the Bank of New York Mellon Investment Management, who I'm sure rowers will know from previously sponsoring the boat race and also sponsoring Head of the Charles. So I used to run recruitment for the investment management business outside of the US. So someone else did America and I did the rest of the world. And from there, I was working with a friend of mine who was on my team. He asked me if I would get involved in Ride London, which is a big 100-mile bike ride around London. And I did what self-respecting boys do and bought the expensive carbon fiber bike and color-coded my helmet with my shoes and all that good stuff. And then set about training. And unfortunately, in my training, I hit a barrier I didn't see. I went over the top and 6'3", 100 kilos of me came down on my beautiful color-coded helmet, which saved me from a brain injury, but didn't save me from breaking my neck. So in 2016, I went from normal guy, normal life, to a head on a pillow looking at ceiling tiles, potentially for the rest of my life. So yeah, significant injury. So I'm a acquired traumatic spinal cord injury.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's obviously a massive thing. I know that you are able to subsequently you're able to get yourself around and more. Tell me how that time developed for you, from the time you had the injury, from what people said to you at the time, the medical care team and so forth.
Yeah.
And your own. I mean, I get. Were you married then?
I was married then. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
So yeah, I had to think about that. But yeah, no, I've been married a while. Helen and I have been together
yeah.
25 years or something.
Fill us in with those details, Stephen.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, as I hit the ground, I felt I was seeing stars. I didn't know what had happened at that point. But I was scooped off the ground. I'm cutting out the Rocky montage here, but I was scooped up off the ground, taken to St George's Hospital in London, which is a big teaching hospital here, and I was put through the battery of tests. So they did all the MRIs, the X-rays, CAT scans, all that stuff. And whilst I was lying in my bed, looking at my ceiling tiles, not being able to feel anything at all, not being able to move anything at all, absolutely scared witless. I mean, the horror of not being able to move your body.
Yeah.
I can't even, it's difficult to describe, actually. Potentially, I was 36 years old at the time. And they came to my bedside, my consultant came to my bedside and said, Steve, your injury is devastating. And we don't know if you're ever going to move or feel anything ever again.
Sure.
But, which is a wonderful word to hear at that point in the conversation. But we are running a clinical experimental research trial in this hospital. It's funded to cover 50 people. And if you wanted to be involved, you'd be co-opted in, you would be qualified to do that. And you would be number 45 of 50. And if you do want to be involved, you've got 2 hours to decide.
Bloody hell.
So yeah, stark contrast. It was funded by a group called Wings for Life, which is a spinal cord injury foundation that I'm an ambassador for today.
Yeah.
Their whole raison d'etre is to find a cure for spinal cord injury. So they don't fund individuals, they fund the science to find a cure for spinal cord injury. And they happen to be funding this particular trial. So when I had my injury, I'm lying there not knowing what the future is going to hold, or even if I wanted to be a part of that future, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
But I said, well, Helen and I had the conversation and said, look, Switzerland's always there if that's our final destination. What do we want to do? And if there was an opportunity for some level of recovery, whatever that looked like, then I said, well, we've got to give it a shot, haven't we? So
can I just interject there? So by Switzerland, you mean the assisted dying?
Yeah, so trigger warning for those that might have that in their life. I didn't know anyone who was seriously injured, seriously paralyzed from the neck down. I looked at people, if I thought about people in that position, I really didn't think that was a life I wanted to lead for me. Now, I will say every injury is unique. Every response to every injury is unique. And even if I had lived that life, that's not to say it's a non-life, right? Some people live some amazing lives driving around in power chairs with their mouth forever, right? But for me, I didn't know if that's what I wanted for me. Well, I'm pretty confident that's not what I wanted for me. And it's
Yeah.
not what Helen wanted for me either, and it's not what I wanted for her. We didn't sign up to that as a life ahead of us. So the ultimate exit was probably a Switzerland trip. However, with that as a backstop, that allowed us to say, well, let's give this a go, and we'll see what happens. And even though 50 people were funded for that trial and 50 people went through that trial, not everybody was able to make a level of recovery that was notable or significant. But for me, the stars aligned, and it gave me a foundation to be able to put everything else into play so that I can then start to make a recovery. And my recovery journey from that was pretty epic, really. I mean, from being able to move nothing, feel nothing, today I'm able to stand, I'm able to walk. My balance is a bit shady. I still have paralysis in all 4 limbs. I still technically am quadriplegic or tetraplegic in the UK. So it affects me in that way. I still have a 6 out of 10 in terms of my pain. My body is constantly buzzing with nerve pain, effectively. And it's not just about walking. A lot of people get absolutely fixated on walking with paralysis, but you've got bladder and bowels and sexual function and how that impacts on the psycho-emotional side of your world as well.
Yeah.
And painful spasms, loss of sleep, all that sort of stuff. The inability to regulate your body temperature, for instance. I mean, there are so many things you don't even think about necessarily that are affected. But I still consider myself very lucky that using that foundation of the experimental clinical research trial, plus all of the love and support from friends, family, colleagues, and my own bloody-minded determination to improve, I gave myself the best potential opportunity and then took that with both hands.
So was it the trial that made you recover, or the treatment, or if you'd have just laid there, would your body have healed itself?
Well, we can never know, right? I mean, from my point of view, I think hand on heart, I would say that trial is what gave me the foundation, and more than the foundation mechanically and biologically, it gave me hope. It gave me hope that it could be better. And hope is a currency we can all trade in, right? It's contagious. As soon as I was hopeful, then that became hopeful for Helen and my friends and my family and my medical team. There's a whole team around you when you go through these things. And because I took it with both hands and I wanted it to be better and I thought it could be better, in fact, I knew it could be better, then that became a motivator and a driver and a fuel for everyone involved to look at making this happen.
So give us an idea of timescale for this.
So I had my injury in 2016, June, and within 90 days, I was taking my first unaided footsteps.
Bloody hell.
So it was pretty quick.
Yeah.
Now, a lot goes on in those 90 days. I was in hospital for 4 months in total, 2 months in intensive care and high dependency, and then 2 months in a rehab hospital. But I was able to stand shortly before that. And then at about 90 days, I was able to stand unaided and start to take gingerly. And don't get me wrong, it's no more than 1 or 2, and I would have fallen over if someone wasn't there. But I was definitely able to move more than I had been able to previously. So yeah, it was an emotional time.
Yeah. I'm struck there because it reminds me very much of my crewmate and friend, a great friend, Adrian Cassidy, who I wrote about in Olympic Obsession, my book. And Adrian dived in at Henley on his stag do, and he basically half severed his spinal column, so he kind of couldn't feel anything. And was taken to Stoke Mandeville, and he was the only guy to eventually walk out of there. But Adrian knew how he learnt he could row before he could walk. They put him on the rowing machine. And the doctors, I think this is right, don't really know why him half severing his spinal column allowed him to do all the things he could. I mean, he's got 6 kids now, he's rowed again and all sorts of stuff. And why other people who might have had a similar severing, were completely paralyzed. So
in the world of spinal cord injury, you kind of get 2 different camps. You have complete injuries where someone severed the spinal cord, and the chances of that being recoverable are far, far less. And then you have incomplete injuries, which is what mine was and what Adrian's was. where you've either damaged it and part severed it, or you've, like in my case, I crushed it and stretched it as kind of simultaneously, because I snapped the ligament on the back of my neck, and that's what gave a destabilizing effect within the spinal canal. So my spinal cord was crushed within the spinal canal. And people like Adrian and I have a greater chance of recovery because it's still attached to a degree. And in my case, it was all about swelling. So you can go from being a incomplete injury where you haven't severed your spinal cord, but if you allow the tissues to die, then it can become a complete spinal cord injury. But a lot of people these days, because people know now not to move bodies when you find them in that position, or in my case with my experimental trial, was all about reducing the bruising, which is why I had to make that decision so quickly. Because if we got to my bruising too late, the damage might well have been done. But by getting to it early, they could reduce the swelling, which save as much nerve tissue as possible, which allowed me to go on and make the recovery that I have.
How do you feel? Because my father-in-law was a paraplegic. He was blown up in the Second World War, and he was able to walk, but he kind of, he had an artificial leg because he lost one leg. But how do you feel as someone who is able to move around as a paraplegic? How is it for you? Is it something you're completely used to now? Do you have to sometimes kick yourself, or what's it like?
So just point on the language, I suppose. Paraplegic means your legs don't work. Or you're affected in two parts of you're affecting your lower limbs, and quadriplegic is you're affected in all four limbs. So I'm quadriplegic technically because mine's a high level. But I'm a walking quadriplegic, and I mean, don't get me wrong, some days I feel like I can do loads of stuff, and other days I can't get out of bed. So it depends on how you are that day. It depends on how you've been that day. When we go to Aviz, it's going to be full on for everyone. In my case, it's going to be busy. There's going to be lots of walking. There's going to be lots of moving around and doing stuff. So I've got to be careful. I know when I get back from a week of that I'm going to be leveled, or I'm going to be totally flattened for 7 days, quite probably. You never really know, but that's one of the things of spinal cord injury that keeps on giving, is that you never quite know. But in my case, when I'm feeling good, I can do things, and I can do things that I wouldn't normally expect someone with my level of injury to be able to do.
I know we were talking about it before we went on air, but I mean, just let people know what your role is going to be in Aviz for this camp.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we're a small board of just 4 people, but so everybody gets involved. As anyone who's been a board member of a small charity will know, that you kind of roll your sleeves up and get involved from everything. And my role principally will be in the media side of things. So I'll be doing the social media, I'll be doing the photography, the interviews and that sort of stuff, because that's kind of a skill set that I've developed over previous events and charity events like Enduro Challenge that I'm sure we'll mention. So that'll be me. So I'm looking forward to getting involved in that way. But I'm not a coach. I'm not anyone like that. We're leaving that to the people.
The experts. So thank you for sharing with us that story. The thing is, we obviously have got you on a bike and making this incredible recovery, but we don't have you connected to rowing or para rowing at all. So there's obviously stuff that's happened, which is really interesting. So let us know how that transpired.
So a big part of my life actually was finding rowing. I went from head on a pillow, as we mentioned earlier, my wife saying to me, I don't know what the future's going to hold, and me saying, what's 200 days from now? And she thought about it and went, no, it's December the 23rd or whatever it was, the 22nd. I said, give me Christmas Day and I'll be back to normal. And that became my 200 days promise to her to get back to normal. And again, missing out the Rocky montage, I threw myself at it, gave myself a reason, big bold goals and then individual little daily wins to be able to get to that. And was lucky enough to be able to walk the turkey to the Christmas table that Christmas, which was an emotional moment for everyone. I'll send you the video. It's a pretty epic video. And I then promised the world I'd get back on the very same bike that I fell from, and I'd cycle 100 miles that I didn't get to do.
I was going to ask you that. I can't believe you did that.
Yeah, neither can I sometimes when I look back on it, but it felt like the right thing to do, almost to beat the thing that beat me.
You weren't scared or anything, were you?
Yeah, well, I did it on a turbo trainer, so I wasn't on the road riding around the roads at 100. I still wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
Helen will veto me getting on a bike
Yeah,
in the street.
kudos to you.
Yeah, which is probably fair enough because I'm a clumsy sod at best of times. Yeah. The spinal cord injury doesn't make you less clumsy, that's for sure. So I ended up getting on a turbo trainer, and I cycled 100 miles on a turbo on Zwift. Have you ever used Zwift?
Yeah, I know.
So I did the London Loop as many times as I needed to do 100 miles, and I came in at just under 20 seconds under 6 hours, which was my goal.
Oh,
so that was pretty cool.
Was that a fluke, or were you going for it at the end?
Oh no, I wanted to keep 17.5 miles an hour as a constant average. So I did the maths on it to work it all out. Adrian at Ludon would be proud of my maths abilities. So I managed to cross the line with 20 seconds to spare, and that was all great. We raised a ton of money for Wings for Life as a charitable event. Did it the following year, and then I wanted to do charity challenges with different people in different ways. And then the pandemic struck, and everybody was at home. I remember sitting at my dining room table. Everyone was at home around the world, scared. No one knew what COVID was. No one knew what coronavirus was. But you knew you couldn't have a cup of tea with your next door neighbour at the easier end of the spectrum, all the way through to you were losing family members at the other end of the spectrum. People were dying in your life, and you didn't know, was it going to affect you? Was it going to affect more people that you knew? When was it going to end? What was it? How long are we going to be in this kind of new world? No one had a clue, and everyone was scared and anxious and separated. And I thought, well, how can we bring the whole world together in a way that would be cohesive at a time when everybody needs that, without having to get together? And it became a bit of a conundrum. And I thought, well, maybe we could do a global live streamed event using fitness, using sport.
Yeah.
And the transformative power of sport that I've always kind of had a keen interest in. And that's where I thought about the rowing machine. And I thought, well, I don't know.
Why rowing machine?
It was a static machine, a bit like the bike that I'd used, and I wanted to do something a bit different to cycling again. Rowing machines felt like something that exists. I mean, Concept 2 have made them fairly ubiquitous around the world. So I have a water rower myself, but other people have other rowing machines. There are loads of brands that are out there, and it wasn't that hard to get to one nearby necessarily. So I thought maybe that could be a good opportunity. So I thought, well, how do we develop something? An Enduro Challenge came out of the back of that. So Enduro Challenge effectively became the world's biggest fully inclusive rowing event for charity that was live streamed. It was 4 hours, and we replaced meters with minutes because it had to be all inclusive. It wasn't about how far you went or how fast you went. You didn't want to beat somebody else when you're trying to create a global community event. You needed to be with them while they were doing it. So it became a start together, row together, finish together event. And you could do that anywhere in the world, whether you're a man, woman, or child, able-bodied or disabled. It would be live streamed. And in fact, we had Camilla Hadland
Horrocks.
We had Fergus Mainland as a commentator as well. We also had a couple of other people, including myself, over in the US that were able to commentate as well to give it a real global feel. And it really took off. I knew no one in rowing. I knew nothing about rowing. But when I made a few phone calls to say, is this a crazy idea? I got some wonderful feedback. People like Nick Baker in the UK, GB Power Rowing team,
coach,
was absolutely wonderful. He almost immediately said, right, what can I do to help? It was wonderful to get his support. He introduced me to a bunch of people and was right behind us. In fact, he even recorded a small mini series of how to row as a PR1, PR2, PR3 rower that we put up onto YouTube so that people who wanted to be involved that maybe had never rowed before.
And that's still up there, is it?
Yeah, it's still up there on the Enduro Challenge YouTube channel. You can go and check that out.
Yeah.
So that was good. He did that with Claire Holman from GB, who does the indoor rowing for Inside Indoor, I think they're called these days, with British Rowing. So that was a wonderful support. And then when you boil it all down, we ended up with a 4-hour live stream, replacing meters with minutes, replacing competition with camaraderie. And we created a global community event in the rowing world, which was an interesting one because I've never met anyone more competitive than a rower. But we took away the competition and we replaced it with camaraderie, and suddenly people were rowing 4 hours on a rowing machine like they've never done before. Some people were covering a marathon distance. We had people in Australia. There's a woman called Kathleen who works for Bont Rowing. She did a marathon at 2 o'clock in the morning in Sydney, I think they're in, because it didn't matter where you were in the world. Everyone started together and everyone rowed together and everyone finished together, and that was the real crux of it. So yeah, what an incredible event. And that transformative power of rowing carried on, and we ended up with another similar event the following year.
Yeah, I mean, I know, because we were talking beforehand, like what's happened to it with you know, the challenge with the live stream company. What is it you need to run another event?
Great question. I need another live stream partner. That's why 2023 didn't happen, because we were going to, we were this close, but unfortunately the live stream partner evaporated, so we weren't able to do that. And unfortunately, the cost of live streaming is expensive. It's like they probably donated in the first 2 events. There was a company called Beings, and they probably donated about 15 grand per year for the live stream to take place. And I didn't want to run an event in 23 that was everybody get on your rowing machine and row together and just know that you are.
Yeah.
You know, that didn't have the same vibe. It wasn't a community event if we couldn't see people and feel people doing the things that we were doing. So I thought, rather than have a half-cocked version of an amazing event that we'd had for the previous 2 years, I thought maybe better to mothball it and see if we can find the right partners to maybe do it again in the future in the way that I would want it to be. So it's not to say it won't ever happen again. I think it will, but we do need to find a live streaming partner that could do that.
And was that mainly para rowers involved, or was that able-bodied rowers as well?
It was for everyone everywhere. So the strapline was everyone everywhere pulling together, which obviously underlined the global community aspect of this. We ended up with, in the second Enduro, had 30 countries simultaneously rowing. We had athletes in 30 countries. We had 2,000 rowers taking part. Wow. And we raised about 50 grand across the 2 events, both for Wings for Life and also for the Power Rowing Foundation. But it was able-bodied and disabled people or people with disabilities, depending on which country you're in and what you're okay with saying. But yeah, it was for everyone everywhere. So if you wanted to play, then you could. You could be in fact, we had a 7 or 8 year old girl on the same team as a para rower.
I've put a comment from Phil. Hi, Phil. It's great you're on watching this. Do you know Phil?
I do know Phil. Phil was, again, one of those people that helped me build Enduro Challenge.
Yeah, okay. So that's just a little message. Thanks, Phil. We talked a lot about the Power Rowing Foundation. I know a bit because I kind of watched you on a podcast with a couple of US ladies. But if people don't know anything about the Power Rowing Foundation, because you haven't said how you got involved in that or what it is, then perhaps you could help them.
Yeah, of course. So, how I got involved effectively came off the back of Enduro Challenge. So when we raised money with the first one for Wings for Life, spinal cord injury research, the second one, I wanted to kind of drill that down a little bit. And rowing, I looked around at rowing charities that needed assistance, and Power Rowing Foundation were one of those. So I spoke to Marilyn Copeland, the founder and co-founder, and said, can I raise money for Wings for Life, for Power Rowing Foundation with the second Enduro Challenge? Yeah. She obviously said yes, and our relationship bloomed from there. I loved what she was doing. I loved how she did it. Power Rowing Foundation was set up by Marilyn and another lady called Abby Gregory back in 2018. Yeah, they're based in the US. So Power Rowing Foundation is a US-based 501c3 non-profit. But even though it's based in the US, it has an international reach, international mandate, effectively. They set up this event, or they set up this charity rather, to assist rowers with impairments around the world, whoever they are, whatever impairments they had, primarily physical, to reach their potential through rowing. Effectively, that was the aim, and that's where it's grown to. So now Power Rowing Foundation have the remit of supporting athletes around the world to reach that potential, and we do that through a number of different ways. It could be cash grants for training. It could be training itself, like the Aviz camp that we're going to be running in the next few days.
Yeah.
It could be through loan of equipment. We have a loan closet where we'll lend people equipment that maybe is expensive for them to buy if they just want to test stuff out and see if it's for them or not. It could be through psychological support. We have a performance psychologist that we fund for assistance. He's a guy that works with the Boston Red Sox called Dr. Jonathan Jenkins. And
that must be interesting.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I mean, ultimately, I could list out 100 things that we do, and there's probably 100 more that we don't yet do. But I think the real message here is, what does the athlete need to perform at their best? And if we can understand what that is, then we can have a conversation about whether Power Own Foundation can help or not. And the majority of the time, we start with yes and work backwards from there. Yeah. So by being fully independent, not having too many people's kind of considerations to take into account, being respectful of those people, actually how we support the athlete is the most important thing. And then how we work with people to make that happen becomes the next important thing. So that could be with NGBs or advocacy work with, I know, World Rowing, for instance. We have great relationships with those kind of people.
I can obviously tell, talking to you, Steven, you've got an amazing amount of energy. Just in terms of what you're talking about, the events you've been involved with organising and the foundation, I'm just wondering where all this energy comes from.
Yeah, so do I sometimes. Yeah, this is where I plug Red Bull, right? No, I mean, ultimately, it's passion, right? I mean, I've found a group of people, of which I am now one, that are often underserved and often overlooked. And that doesn't need to be the case, because one of the things that really strikes me is that athletes are athletes. It doesn't matter whether they're para athletes or whether they're non-para athletes, they're athletes. If you turn up every day, you give it your best shot every day, and you perform to your full potential as often as you possibly can, you are an athlete. So why one group would get massive support and another group wouldn't only comes down to visibility and the opportunity to be on shows like this, to share that message and say, get involved. You know, these are a group of people who have got incredible athleticism. They can really shift that boat. And it's a great opportunity to be involved with someone's story and improve their life whilst watching great competition happen and promotion of a sport that's otherwise underfunded and underappreciated.
I'm minded, to ask you, how different are you as a person after that happened, your accident and recovery, to what you were before? Or are we seeing Steven Dowd Mark II now, or are you just the same guy?
I think, it's an interesting question. I think I'm a guy who had something happen to them. I'm a big believer that a negative event doesn't need to define you negatively. And whilst we all have defining events in our life, I think maybe it's easy to put it this way. As I was recovering from my paralysis, every evening I would sit down and say, am I better than I was 24 hours ago? Have I improved? Am I better than yesterday? And if I was, then I would feel good about myself. I'd tick a box. I'd reward myself in some way. I'd maybe do something or have something that would be a small celebration. But if I wasn't, and if I hadn't tried my hardest, then I would have to have a word with myself and try and improve. Paralysis didn't necessarily, or spinal cord injury didn't necessarily mean that was different to what I was doing before my injury. I was probably still doing something similar. It just wasn't as poignant and necessary and focused as it was in the early days after my injury. So I'm probably redefining myself every day. But aren't we all doing that? Aren't we all kind of checking in on who we are now versus who we were yesterday?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I suspect not for everybody. I was kind of thinking, that's really interesting how you came up with that question and then, use it as a motivational tool. And I'm thinking, is that something you just sort of made up yourself? Did you read it in a sports psychology book? Did someone recommend it to you?
Yeah, no, I didn't read it. It was kind of internal, I suppose. Although that said, I've just recently discovered Stoicism, which is fascinating. I'm not religious in any way, or I don't have any deep thoughts about a lot of that stuff. But I came across Stoicism, and as I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, this is stuff that I think. This is stuff that I do in my life. So I think there's an element there that's been useful, and I'm looking to explore that a bit more because I might be able to hone what I'm doing a little more so. But I think I've always been relatively objective. I'm a big believer in accepting a situation objectively. So it would be great to say, why me? But it's much better to say, why not me? And then look to what next? What can I do? And control the controllables kind of idea. Not waste time and worry about things that are out of your control, but focus on the things that are in your control. That way you can make incremental improvements. Nobody gets to the top of Everest without taking 100,000 steps beforehand. But each one of them is only one step. You just got to keep taking enough of them and you'll get there. So that's how I kind of approach my paralysis. That's how I approach my recovery from paralysis. But that's kind of how I approach my career and my life and whatnot beforehand, I think. Maybe not quite to the same extreme, but I think it was there before.
Yeah. It just occurred to me, do you work like salaried work now, or is this your life in terms of what you're doing with Enduro and the PRF?
So PRF Foundation takes up a lot of my time. It's wholly voluntarily, so I'm not paid in any way. None of us are. It's all done through love and taxes. But from my point of view, PRF Foundation takes up a lot of time. But when I'm not doing my charitable work, then I'm a diversity and inclusion strategist on the external advisory board at the technology company Sage that you might have heard of.
Yeah.
Certainly, if you've been watching the rugby, they sponsor the rugby. So they're a big global FTSE 100 company. So I help define, from a disability angle, I help define the global strategy for diversity, equity, and inclusion there. And I'm also a keynote speaker. So I use my story as a backdrop to tell the audience's story in many ways. And I share my story as a way to draw out key insights about how to face challenge, forced change, and crisis recovery for organizations around the world. So I'm paid for my keynote work.
So your life has completely pivoted since when you were working for Mellon?
Oh, absolutely. I'm no longer doing the 14-hour days, finding people's jobs. But that said, I'm probably now still doing the 14-hour days, but I'm doing it on my terms with a kind of portfolio career and a bunch of different interests.
Yeah. And so what does the future hold? How much are you a person that makes plans or looks into the future, or just kind of wakes up each day and says, okay, what's the day gonna give me?
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that, because someone literally asked me that beforehand, before I called into this. So yeah, the well-prepared answer. But no, I'm definitely more of a short-term thinker. I'm very much a believer in the now is the only thing that's real, to be honest. Yeah, history is what happened, and it's a useful data point about where stuff was, what occurred. But you can't go there. I can't get a train ticket to yesterday. That's not a thing. And the future, frankly, is all about potential. What can the future hold? That's more about gearing yourself in the now, in the today, in the making the most of where you are, so that you put yourself in the frame to have a better future. But that future will only be today when you get there. So really, today is the only thing that really counts. I'm not really a massive long-term thinker, and particularly things like a spinal cord injury, which happened to me in a split second. Yeah, the future, if I'd have planned it, would now be wholly different. So what's the point in putting too much stock in the future?
I'm wondering, this might be an unfair question, because I think I'd find it a bit challenging, but if we looked at the Paralympics, in terms of who might do well, or so on, how able are you to chat about that?
Yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, I'm going to say anyone who had PRF support is going to be amazing, obviously. And if you haven't had PRF support, I pity you. No, I don't. If you haven't had PRF support, give us a call, because there could well be stuff that we could do together. And as I say, we support athletes from every country around the world, and we're particularly interested in those countries that don't have support. There are lots of countries who are wealthy, that are rich, that have great rowing pedigrees behind them, that have para teams that are doing incredibly well and probably will do well.
Yeah,
I've definitely got a conversation that I have fairly regularly with this idea of the best in the world.
Yeah.
Because the best in the world, to me, is only really the best of the people who have had the opportunity to be the best in the world. If you have all of that opportunity and that springboard behind you, then chances are you'll do very well.
Yeah.
If you don't have that opportunity, chances are you won't do very well. But if you were to have an equitable framework where people had similar support, then I think the outcomes of the podiums might be very different. But we're a long way from seeing that happen, hence why the PRF exists. We'd love to not exist. We'd love to be in a position where para rowers don't need support, where para rowers have opportunities given to them at every turn. But unfortunately, they don't. So we try and step in and help where we can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess, because if you look to potential gold medalists, you'd look at Great Britain as one of the strong para rowing powers, and Lauren Rolls and Greg Stevenson.
And Ben Pritchard as well.
PR2. Well, yeah, Ben Pritchard will probably be targeting a medal, maybe bronze medal. And then you've got the PR3 mixed four with the British athletes, very strong in that, but USA coming back into it. And then the Aussies are very strong with Nikki Ayres and Jed Altschwager in the new event, the PR3 mixed double, I think, burst on the scene. But, new events, people get quicker every year. And then you've got that diversity with Roman Polyansky from the Ukraine and the Italian athlete Perini in the men's PR1. And then another nationality, Birgit Skarstein, with Moran Samuel, the Israeli, in the women's PR1. So I guess there's a fair spread of diversity through the world in those para events.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of those countries that you mentioned, they don't get enough support. Nobody ever gets enough support, frankly,
No.
a lot of rowing. But yeah, I'd like to see the growth of flags that we don't normally see in the event. I'd love to see more of that for sure.
Yeah, well, I think it was super for me. I mean, I met her. I'm not sure she actually raced. Asai Mohammed, the Kenyan lady that we talked of, the PR1 sculler. But she was in Varese last year, and I was doing a bit of research on athletes. I don't think she actually raced in the end, but I saw her in a wheelchair going round, and I said, "Oh, hi, you Asaya?" And it was really good to see. Wow, Kenya have a para athlete. This is really the sport is really spreading and making waves. And I guess that you're very much part of that at the Para Rowing Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, the Kenyan example, Asiya is amazing. As a person, Asiya is amazing, but she was the first female para rower for Kenya in Tokyo, and she obviously competed in Tokyo and will be again in Paris. She didn't even have a boat to row in. So these are the very basics that most people would assume, that people jump in a boat and learn to row and then get good at rowing and go on to represent their country, isn't always the case. Yeah, as I say, Asiya didn't even have a boat, so we were able to assist her with a new monitor, for instance, for her Concept 2 erg. She didn't have a monitor. So how do you row to a split? How do you know how far you've been or how fast you are or what your power curves are? You don't. She didn't have oars that fitted her. So we were able to get oars. That was a weird story, actually. In order to get oars into Kenya, it was proving incredibly difficult to get through various borders to just post them to Kenya. That wasn't going to happen. So we had to meet her at an event it might have been in Italy or in France. I think it was in France, where we were able to, it was a tennis event that she went to. And whilst she was there, we were able to connect with her and get some oars from Concept 2 in Vermont over to France, which she could then get from France into Kenya just as hand luggage almost. So there's a lot of playing around the edges to try and find solutions that other people might not necessarily have the time or effort to be able to do. So we're very lucky to have the passion and the stickability to be able to solve some of these problems so that the athletes can just focus on the thing that they want to do. Right? Athletes should be training. They shouldn't be worried about all the other stuff, the money, the equipment, the politics, and all that. They just need to be getting in boats and on ergs and training and becoming the best that they can be. So Para Rowing Foundation's real principal drive is to take away all of that stuff, or as many of those hurdles as we can, so that and add as much stuff as we can so that they can
Yeah.
fulfill their potential.
Stephen, we've been talking for an hour now. It's been amazing. I just wonder if there's anything that, you know, we could have covered that we haven't. Anything I haven't asked you, anything you'd like to talk about.
Well, maybe there's a part 2 on a whole new hours of chat, which maybe we can catch up after Aviz, and I'll give you some of the stories as to what happened in the event.
That'd be lovely, because we've had so many people on this show. You know, I can see 67 at the moment, which is you know, phenomenal number and indicates a great interest. I just wonder if we could conclude with you saying this is how to get in touch with me or with the charities that, you know, we need to raise money for, we need to donate to.
Yeah, absolutely. So who have we covered? wingsforlife.com if you're interested in supporting spinal cord injury research. stevendowd.com if you're interested in powering your customers or your staff through a keynote speech. Pararowingfoundation.org is where you can get in touch with people if power rowing and supporting power rowing is your bag, and we would absolutely love to hear from you on that. That's my real sort of underline. And obviously get yourself over and subscribe to Crossy's Corner on YouTube.
I love that. Steven, it's been a fantastic pleasure. It's been great to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And we'll end the live part of the interview now. Bye, everybody.
Take care, guys.